Here's how the old stuff sounded. And here are the new drums. So as you can hear, it's a pretty huge difference. So it was 6 years ago that I recorded my first at-home remote recording session from my home studio. Back then, it was in like a storage closet. And it's been 6 years. Over that 6 years, I've recorded on a ton of songs. I've learned a ton about recording drums at a home studio. And today, I'm gonna re-record that first session I ever did and see how much of a difference there is after 6 years of working on getting better and better sounds from my home studio. I got into home recording just like most of my friends did, where I live in Nashville, I was playing live gigs, and then someone that I knew hit me up and said, "Hey, do you do like recording at home?" And I said, yeah, sure. Because I wanted to see if I could do it, and it was money and great. I had a couple mics, I threw them up, and what I want to do is show you where I started and where I am now in hopes that I can encourage you, and also you can learn some stuff along the way and kind of learn from my mistakes. Because experience is one of the most important things that you can have in the home session world, and hopefully this will, help you. So this is the session as it was recorded, 6 years ago. What we have is some percussion down here, and then kind of like the main drum kit here. Throughout this video, unfortunately, you won't be able to hear this song because it's actually a song that got put out. You can check it out on Spotify. I'll put a link in the description so you can actually hear what these drums from 6 years ago sounded like when they came out on Spotify. They sound good. But in the original session, I remember the producer needed me to do a lot of different things because I wasn't giving them exactly what they needed. We had to kick it back and forth a lot. And I didn't know that when you do an overdub of the snare drum thing, it needs to sound a little different. Like there were all these things I didn't know back then that now I would know. I would know how to ask better questions. But let's just get into it. Here's what the drums sounded like totally raw 6 years ago when I did my first drum recording in a storage closet. So things generally feel pretty good, like nothing needs to be pocketed or whatever. And at this point, I didn't know how to edit drums, so it couldn't have been. Here's that same thing with just a little bit of EQ and light compression on stuff to make it sound a little bit louder and cleaner and, kind of like cleaning up mud and things that anyone's gonna do. As far as this is the first time I ever recorded myself in a little storage closet, like honestly, when I pulled the session back up, I was kind of surprised that it sounded this good. But I think we can do a lot better. When I listen to this, I think that the drums all sound very, very, very far away. Even once I've added a little bit of compression and stuff, like the drums, like the snare drum just sounds like there's a lot of air around it. The overheads, the cymbals lack presence and attack. Let's go to a spot where you can hear those. Like everything just sounds really far away, and that's a mixture of, probably how I had stuff mic'd, but when you have less expensive gear that doesn't naturally like make things just very easily sound better, you have to get really strategic. And over the years of recording on that same gear, I was able to kind of figure out how to make that stuff sound as good as it possibly could. But this is not it. Really, because this is the first time I ever did it. And then there are things like the like this overdubbed snare drum. that I think could just sound better. Again, I only gave them an overhead of that, which is cool. It's atmospheric, which will make it, sound a little bit further away than the main drum kit. But again, it sounds really far away. And only giving them an option of the overheads means that they're really limited on how they can use that. But all of this stuff just kind of sounds really raw and naked. Even the shaker sounds kind of far away. The sounds just kind of sound very raw and naked. The biggest difference that I'm going for is making sure that when I'm delivering tracks these days, I'm not trying to tie anybody's hands and make them sound so final that I've eliminated people's chance to like mold the tracks how they need to fit into the song. But I am trying to give them something that right when they pull them up in their DAW, they throw them into the session, and this tracks that I sent them will, maybe with just a little bit of bus compression, sound like pretty close to a good drum mix. And these are just really far off. So I'm just going to redo all these parts. I'm going to try and play this type of drum part start to finish and just kind of see how it sounds. I have recorded everything right here. These are all the original tracks from the Logic session. I had those as references so that I could record kind of the same exact drum part in this new session. And then down here, we have all the new stuff. So all these tracks in red are the full big main kit. All of these are the snare march thing. We have some cymbal swells. We have some ride cymbal eighth notes down here. We have some clacks. And then down here in the green, we have some tambourine stuff and some shaker stuff. Here's how the old stuff sounded. And here are the new drums. So as you can hear, it's a pretty huge difference. I was actually kind of blown away by how big a difference there was. It's really unbelievable. And actually the old drums, even though they sound so tiny and they sound quieter than the new drums, they're actually louder if you look at the kind of true peak loudness. So like the old drums are actually louder, but they sound like that versus it's a pretty gigantic difference. So let me solo out just the drum kit so you can hear that. That's just entirely different. So let's go to these verse and we can just hear kind of just the two drum kits back to back. Here are the new drums. And here are the old drums. So that versus this. It's a huge difference. And I think, the biggest difference is back then, the toms are really flabby. That's a mixture of tuning and the mic placement. And now I just know how to put a mic in front of a tom and tune it so that you can play eighth notes on it without it getting flabby, where you have more transient and not just like la, 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 going on. The snare sounds much, much better. And that, again, is also just like tuning, knowing how to tune and muffle a drum so that and dampen a drum so that it just cuts through really well. And the kick mic, again, it's like knowing how to tune and place a mic better. But I also have a kick out mic and a kick in mic, which does help. But certainly that's not the only difference between the two. Having that kick out mic right there really helps. That's the kick in and the kick out. Those sound beautiful together. So I'll solo out each of these just so you can hear them. So those are the kick mics. Here's the snare top. Here's a second snare top mic that's kind of really aggressive, overdriven on saturating the preamp. Snare bottom. Here are the toms. Here's the overheads. A little mic named after Roger Sterling from Mad Men. That's adding some cool room aggression. Here's a little mic that adds a bunch of weird mid-range, named after Don Draper from Mad Men. Here's some room mics. And bar room mics. The other thing that's different is in the original take 6 years ago, I recorded all the cymbal swells and all the ride cymbal stuff that happens like toward the end of the song. You have swells going on, you have ride cymbal eighth notes, and you have the full kit. And in the old version, I actually played the ride cymbal and the main kit together. And these days, for a groove like this where it's a bunch of toms and stuff, like part of the way that the drums sound so big without any reverb, without any samples or anything, is because these room mics, the room mics and character mics are huge. All that space is, if you add cymbals in there, you start limiting how much compression you can use, how much stuff you can do to those mics. And, it's not like I always play drums and cymbals separately, but on something like this where the ride cymbal really is just doing eighth notes, from a mix perspective, you're going to have a lot more control if you record the cymbals separately. But also with this part, it's a very syncopated boom, doom, blah, doom, boom, cap, ba, ba, boom, and those little fills. If I don't make myself play ride cymbal during this and I just overdub it, I have a little more freedom with the drum part to play stuff that I can't if I'm trying to keep eighth notes going while I'm playing all this other stuff. And back 6 years ago, I just didn't know that, if I split those up, not only would I make the engineer happier, but I'd also give myself a few more options for like how I can build that groove. These tambourine hits, so 6 years ago, these tambourine hits kind of sounded like, and I printed some reverb on them, and they sound really far away, and they sound small, and they're just not great. And in this new version, I kind of have two different tambourines, because they're reinforcing the backbeat. One of them's a little smaller, and then one of them is like much wider. So that kind of gives it a different dimension. As well, I think all my layers are much tighter now. Everything it doesn't necessarily feel totally metronomically perfect, but all the parts just lock in. Like toward the end of the song when everything is going, you have the full kit, you have 16th notes on the shaker, you have the tambourine on the backbeats, you have clacks going on, you have eighth notes on the ride cymbal. In the original recording 6 years ago, it definitely doesn't sound bad, it doesn't sound wrong, but it's not really tight. I think that the new version just has like all the parts are much, much tighter, which makes the thing feel much bigger. So this is the new part. And here's the old one. Also having that ride cymbal eighth note thing be on a separate take. Those eighth notes are much more controlled because I'm not kind of moving from the cymbal over to the drums and moving the cymbal. And in the original take, everything's just getting a little too washy and out of control, which again adds to like the knot tightness and kind of sloppiness of it all. Let's go over to this verse. There was an overdubbed marching part that in the original take, I just think it's really like 6 years ago, I just really didn't know how to overdub marching parts. So this is how kind of this like drum groove with the marching part sounded originally. The snare drum sounds very, very small. There's not a lot of space around it, which makes it compete with the main drum kit. The main drum kit is kind of the thing you want close to your face. And then that marching part would be nice to kind of like feel like it was a little bit further away. In the new take, here's how the march sounds. And most of that sound is coming from this room mic. And I did add just a 7% mix of reverb to this, just to push it a little bit further away from your face so that the drums feel like the main thing and the march feels like it's supporting the main thing. Here's another thing that I really didn't know how to do 6 years ago. Overdubbing like different percussion auxiliary parts. So in the original thing, there are these clacks that come in. There's some reverb on it that I printed, which is terrible. And those to me just sound really paper thin. They sound like chopsticks against a, thin wooden table or something. They don't sound great. In the new clacks that I recorded, and in context with everything else, they just do a much better job at being an event that kind of helps add momentum than they did in the original, which was this. Terrible. I'm gonna let this whole thing play. You can just hear kind of, the difference 6 years makes when you kind of just stick to your thing and work at it day after day.